The Ukrainians have hit one of Russia's stealth fighters, the Su-57, with a drone and at the very least damaged it. This much we can confirm at the current moment. They also keep striking Russian air defenses on the Crimean Peninsula. They claim that another landing ship was at the very least hit, if not sunk, and they have started the production of gliding bombs themselves to respond in kind in the future. At the same time, there is some claims that the Russians have started an invasion into Sumy Oblast, and we have developments along other parts of the front line, so a lot to say in this situation. Report about the war in Ukraine. Hello and welcome. Only 27 of all thermal power plants are still operational inside of Ukraine. 42 thermal power plants and 20 hydroelectric power plants have been destroyed by the Russians so far. Since the beginning of this year, the Russians have used 10,000 gliding bombs, 3,200 in May alone. That shows the intensity of the usage of these cheap precision weapons by the Russians. On the other hand, the Ukrainians strike back and they claim that they have hit a Sukhoi 57, Russia's most modern stealth fighter, and their only stealth fighter they have so far. Now, stealth fighter, while it is low observable, it is no comparison that basically every expert agrees upon. It's no comparison to the stealthiness of the F-35 or the F-22, even though it is low observable, but the whole design layout wasn't really meant to be a direct competition in this regard. So that's just to put this in context. That doesn't mean that it's a bad plane. It's Russia's most modern plane, and the pictures show that it's here at the moment. Actually, the Russians were in process of construction of a shelter apparently above it, and the pictures of the day after show burn marks next to the plane. So far we have proof that the Ukrainians have hit very close to it, and Fighter Bomber, a pro-Russian military blogger who is well connected in the Air Force, confirms that it was hit. He says right now there is assessment being done if it can be put back into service again. Obviously, a plane is not armored, so shrapnel can damage it fairly easily and fairly heavily. We see that it is discolored as well, which would indicate some damage on the plane itself. This can be a write-off. This can be repairable. As of now, simply from the picture, we can only confirm that it was hit, which is still a massive success. The Ukrainians say that they believe they've hit a second one as well, but they do not have proof of this, so there is no visual evidence. The attack was on this airfield here, the Akhtubinsk airfield in Astrakhan, which is east of Volgograd, and as you can see, a fair distance away from the border, right next to Kazakhstan. And we can even see on the satellite pictures that it was in massive use in the past. Now, this is obviously Google Maps and not a current picture, but you see that there's a huge assortment of planes on the airfield, and it was one of the airfields that the Russians used for their Sukhoi 57. Ukraine is also saying that they've hit another Ropucha landing ship tank that is part of the Black Seas fleet. So far, I have not seen any proof. Supposedly, it was hit with a naval drone, but as of now, I cannot say if it's true that it was hit. There are some rumors that there's an oil slick, but they might have hit another ship. So as of now, we don't have any proof that it sank or that it was damaged. But this might be the reason why the Russians started to reposition their ships from Novorossiysk. Some of them have now been placed into the Azov Sea, where they should be safer from attacks with Ukrainian naval drones. Let's switch to the front line itself. On the northern front, we have movement. Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen strongman, said that Russian troops had taken Rishivka. This is, if I'm not completely wrong, yeah, I think it's actually here, right next to northwest of Sumy, here, this town. They have shown pictures of them having a flag there, but the Ukrainians say that this is not true, that there was no, that the situation is under control and the invasion didn't happen. And we have the Legion of Russia here with the Russian volunteers fighting on the Ukrainian side, and they basically say this whole thing is a gray zone anyways. So the Ukrainians don't have troops directly at the border. As we can see, it's just like a mere kilometer or less from the Russian border. Civilians aren't there anymore, and it's under fire by the Russians for quite a long time. So some Russians went over, raised a flag, and headed back to Russia, and now the Ukrainians have removed the flag. So at least according to the Ukrainians, the situation is under control and nothing has changed. As of now, we'll still have to see if more comes out of this. But as said, the Ukrainians say nothing to worry about here in this situation. Still, though, we have movement. We have additional events. According to Sky News, the Ukrainians have used the combat planes to strike targets in Belgorod. According to them, that would be the first attack with planes, so not helicopters, with not rotary wing, but static wing planes. Forgot the name for that, I'm sorry. Into Russia itself. Fairly early in the beginning of the war, we had attacks with Mi-24 Hind combat helicopters into Belgorod, which was one of the incursions by Ukrainian Air Force into Russia's territory. But now, according to Sky News and according to reports from Ukraine, the first attack has been flown by the Ukrainian Air Force into Belgorod itself. On the front line, we have news from no change, no proof of change in the northern areas here. In the last situation report, I told you that the Ukrainians have attacked Liboke, but so far only with IFVs, and I did not see any proof that they took territory. And from Vovchansk, there's claims that the Ukrainians keep up the pressure and take fresh territory in the region here, but the overall situation hasn't changed either. And since the last situation report, I do not have fresh news from fresh developments. On the eastern front, no change north of the Seversky Donetsk, and on the south of the Seversky Donetsk, we have reports and visual evidence that the Russians get closer to Rostolivka here in the region. Recently, they advanced somewhat here along the railroad track, and now we have visual evidence of them basically almost reaching Rostolivka. You can see this is where they have been spotted, and this is more or less at this point. So the situation, those tree lines here, should now be under Russian control. The actual front line is probably like this. Rostolivka is now being pressured directly from the Russians. That was it from this whole area. In Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, I do not have any fresh change since Saturday, where the Russians were confirmed to have more or less captured half of the canal district here east of the Donetsk Canal. But that was it in this region here. We have changed though south in Avdiivka. The Russians have taken roughly half of Novo-Oleksandrivka, which is confirmed by various sources, including Ukrainian admissions of defeat here. We have a Ukrainian mill blogger showing us here, Petrenko, how much of it has fallen into Russian hands. This is obviously increasing the pressure. This means that the Ukrainians have lost more or less all of this here in Novo-Oleksandrivka, and there are rumors that supposedly criminal prosecution has started against 40 Ukrainian soldiers because they fled the place. So far, I've only seen this in pro-Russian channels, so this might be true, this might not be true. Take it with some grain of salt, but supposedly, at least if the pro-Russian side tells the truth here, Ukrainian soldiers simply abandoned their position once more. We heard that this was the accusation at Ocheretine as well in the past a couple of weeks ago. Further south, we have Russian advances at Umanske. The Ukrainians have lost positions in this tree line here and somewhat to the east as well. We have fresh geolocalizations there as well, where the Russians are now in this tree line as well. So they increasingly advance from Umanske as well. And further south, actually, we have no, it was a little bit north, I'm sorry. Here at Novopokrovske, there's an interesting video of Ukrainian helicopters striking the Russian positions. We see Mi-24 that are... Okay, I'm sorry. No, it's out. We see them here. I need to probably put this on mute. Ukrainian Mi-24 using unguided rockets striking Russian positions. You see them dispersing flares, so they can't be that easily hit with manpads. We see 2 of them, and we have a geolocalization of this as well. This is directly at the area here where the Russians have advanced recently. So we see Ukrainian attacks right at the front line. Even in eastern Ukraine, the Ukrainians are still striking with their own air force. Further south, we have no additional developments. The next is at Krasnohorivka, and here the situation is not too encouraging for the Ukrainian side, as we have additional advances by the Russians, and the video showing Russian attack, and it shows Russian tanks here. Also at this area here, but this is already considered to be under Russian control. But the Russian tanks operating here, which is here, would probably indicate that this should no longer be considered a gray zone, but that this is very likely now under Russian control. Otherwise, the Russian tanks would probably not operate here if they have Ukrainians in their back as well. So the southern part of Krasnohorivka is probably under Russian control as well. Further south, no change that I can record, but we have a significant change in Staromayorsk. And here in Staromayorsk, we have the Russians raising their flag right at the northern part of town, and which is more or less here. So we could assume that more or less Staromayorsk has fallen at this point. Obviously, this was not one of the northernmost houses. We see here the map indicating that the Ukrainians still hold the northernmost buildings. This is obviously possible, but the majority of Staromayorsk is now definitely in Russian hands. Further west, no news, neither from Orikhiv nor from the Dnipro, so at least nothing that indicates a change in territory, a fresh change of territory. So we switch directly to the Crimean Peninsula, and here there was a fresh Ukrainian strike with ATACMS on the Crimean Peninsula, admitted by the Russian mill bloggers. Now, the Russians claim that they shot down several, but at least 10 ATACMS were used, probably 12. Ukraine says 2 S-300 were hit and 1 S-400. It's unclear how much of this was supposedly, like they say, 4 radars were hit and several launchers. So far, I have not seen solid proof that something was destroyed. Now, films showed some fires at some positions where probably the air defense systems might be, but that doesn't prove that they have destroyed something. All we know so far that the Russian attack, that the attack on the Russians happened, and that there were some hits on the ground. The Russians admit that the 31st Air Defense Division was hit, and had casualties, but that doesn't mean that launchers have been destroyed. That implies it, but as said, as of now, we simply do know that some attackers apparently made it through, but no more details. And fighter bomber said again here that the air defense is lying towards its superiors, but as said, the damage itself cannot be assessed at this very moment. Overall, we have another interesting point from Mashovets, who is a lieutenant colonel or colonel, I can't remember, in the Ukrainian armed forces, an analyst that is being quoted quite a lot. He mentions that the Russians have now built up strategic reserve of 60,000 men. We talked about it in the past, that while the Russians are suffering heavy losses, they still manage to recruit a little more than they actually lose. And one of the results for this is that they managed to build up a strategic reserve. Obviously, 60,000 isn't that much yet, and we'll have to see how well they are equipped and where they will be used, but the Russians are currently able to build up reserves at the same time while having the initiative. And on the border between Chernihiv and Sumy, the build-up is continuing. Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod, basically along this border here. But according to the Ukrainians, confirm this, but they say as of now the troop concentration is nowhere close to be sufficient to seriously threaten those positions. So what we might see is smaller units crossing the border, maybe taking a border town or two, but a serious push to capture Sumy, to capture Chernihiv or something like this cannot be expected as of now. For that, the Russians clearly are not strong enough. In partisan activity, partisan and sabotage, we also have quite a number of news. The former former mayor of Kupiansk is in the hospital here of Kupiansk, is in the hospital in Belgorod with heavy injuries after an assassination attempt on him. Hernadi Mateshora is his name, and he was elected in 2020 in Ukraine, but he switched sides in 2022 towards the Russians and cooperated with them, and thus he is under prosecution by Ukraine for treason, for national treason, and now at least the assumption would be that there was made an attempt on his life by the Ukrainian intelligence, but that second part we do not know, but the confirmation is that he's with serious injuries in the hospital. We also have news about an ammunition explosion in a Polish factory in the Mesko plant. Here it happened in the missile rocket department. This factory produces the Grom manpads, which are Polish air defense systems that are being considered one of the most modern manpads available, and obviously Poland is supplying it to Ukraine. Here, the reports say that one person was killed. The reason for the explosion or fire is not confirmed as of now. It can be an accident, it can be sabotage. As of now, I do not have more details. But we do have some news from the Czech Republic here, where the Czech government, the Czech prosecutors say that police have captured a saboteur from Latin America who is Spanish speaking, and he poured gasoline over buses but didn't manage to light them. He then fled and was later caught. According to the Czech government, he is member of Telegram groups which try to instigate arson attacks, and thus was apparently hired by someone on Telegram to commit sabotage in Ukraine. The Czech believe that that the Russian intelligence agencies are behind it, but I have not found any further details about this. Then we have news from the BBC. BBC Russia has published a long article about Wagner and Wagner's losses, and they have identified losses that Wagner had in the battle for Bakhmut. In total, they lost 19,547 men. 17,175 of those were former prisoners. So among the losses, 88% of the people killed were former convicts that Wagner used in the Battle of Bakhmut. As said, identified are 19,547. Troop generation we have from Russia as well, that the Russians increasingly are successful in hiring foreigners for their armed forces. Ukrainians confirm that the number of Nepali citizens and African citizens from African states are increasing among the prisoners of war. A clear sign that the Russians are increasingly successful in hiring foreigners for their military efforts. And the Russians are working on attempts to increase the usage, I guess, of tanks. What we have here is them demonstrating a remotely controlled T-72 AMT. If I'm not completely wrong, that should be one that was captured from Ukraine. Because I think AMT was a Ukrainian modification. I might be wrong here though. But they demonstrate that it can be remotely controlled. For that, they use two men. One is driving, one is controlling the turret. And obviously, at this point, as the T-72 has an autoloader, in general, it doesn't require a personnel inside of the tank if you're able to control it from outside. This would obviously not work with T-55, T-72, or most of the Western MBTs that still require a loader. Here, the Russians could actually use it, but in the past, unmanned ground vehicles have not proven to be too successful, as the communication with the tank is fairly difficult and easy and prone to jamming, and thus the usability is somewhat limited. Should the Russians actually use them in scale, that might obviously allow the Ukrainians to maybe capture some of them, but we'll have to see in the future. Ukrainian armed forces are also giving some news. The Ukrainians saying that their air force basically has run out of unguided rockets for its Sukhoi 25. That's what Brigadier General Sergei Golubtsov said. I'm sorry for the butchering of the name. Now, though, the Sukhoi 25 are flying with the French AASM. Those are guided air-to-ground weapons. They can be supplied with a rocket engine to increase the range. Otherwise, they are just gliding bombs. Basically, he's saying that the Ukrainian Sukhoi 25 are now dropping gliding bombs as well. France so far has promised the Ukrainians 50 and supposedly delivered 50 a month. Now in the future they want to supply 300 to Ukraine and thus increasing the number obviously sixfold. At the same time, the Ukrainians are also working on setting up their own production of domestically of domestic production in gliding bombs, which should not be too difficult, as we can see how in which scale the Russians have done it. That would be another example of one side learning from the other and copying their successes. But at the same time, we have to say, even if the Ukrainians are increasing their production, even if the Russians are giving them 300 a month, last month the Russians have used 3,200, so more than 10 times as much, usually even often with a bigger weight. They are now building gliding bombs with up to 3 tons in weight. There's still a long way to go for the Ukrainians to catch up to that. But we have some good news after all. What we have here is that's a pro-Ukrainian page reporting from the war. And once again, they show BMP-1TS. Here that you can see here, and the pictures of those are increasingly appearing. That seems to be a sign that Ukraine has actually started serial production for them. Here they take a BMP-1 and basically bring it into the modern age. We see BMP-2s here, and the big change from BMP-1 to BMP-2 was the switch over from a 76mm low pressure gun to a 30mm autocannon that is far more suitable for fighting in the modern age. The 76mm low pressure gun is basically, you could probably compare it with an RPG-7 that has a little extended range. In the 21st century, that piece is close to being useless. So the BMP-1s had a very limited firepower in the past. Now switching them over to a new turret that is even unmanned, that has a 30mm autocannon and 2 to 4 anti-tank guided missiles, obviously brings that completely obsolete BMP-1 into the modern age, making it more combat capable. It adds a new fire control system that allows for automatic lead, so to make it more easier to hit moving targets. It gives them thermal vision, so the whole combat capabilities of the BMP-1s is massively increased, and here it's more and more of those appear. So it seems the Ukrainians have started serial production of this, otherwise we wouldn't see more and more of them appearing. Then we have news from Ukraine and the F-16s, and here we have an interesting statement. He says that they say that in an interview that the F-16s, some of them will have to stay outside for additional training, so they can't use all of the F-16s in Ukraine, but some others will be stationed outside of Ukraine. Now this has to be understood here how it's meant. This doesn't mean that some F-16s are in Poland, get rearmed from there and fight from there. According to this, they are simply parked outside of Ukraine to allow for switching around. This is actually a fairly smart move, because the F-16s, if they are in Poland, they are safe from Russia. They can have full maintenance there. They can be fully combat capable. And if one of the other F-16s urgently needs repairs, needs maintenance, it's simply being replaced with one of the fresh ones, with one of the fully combat capable ones, and thus keeping the availability of the F-16s, the number that is available in Ukraine. It keeps this number high, while at the same time not endangering all those in maintenance, as the Polish Air Force, for instance, has F-16 themselves and thus should be able to do maintenance. This is another sign how probably Ukraine's F-16s will receive their maintenance, probably with aid from other nations, and obviously allowing them a much higher ready rate of their own planes. Then we are already done for today. Now, this was it for today with the situation report. If you like this, then please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment. What do you think about the current developments? And what do you think about Ukraine being allowed to park its F-16s abroad? And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. So if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel. And that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.